got here, there was an announcement that Stanford has a new MOOC in global women's health that they're offering, or something to do with the globe and women's health. So, so it's interesting, right, to think about these different models of not only how we are offering courses, but, how folks are engaging and learning from them. So we have also been abuzz about Professor Juha's and Professor Balsamo's intervention in MOOCs, which is the DOC, or Distributed Online Collaborative Course. And we were very fortunate to have a group of folks here at Rutgers who participated in the first ever DOC last fall. So they're going to actually share their experiences in this next session, engaging students across the disciplines in feminist dialogues on technology, lessons, challenges, and successes. And this session includes Professor Karen Alexander, who is Dean of Junior and Senior Programs at Douglas Residential College. She has her PhD from the University of London in Contemporary American Writing, and is former senior editor at Signs Journal of Women and Culture and Society, and she is one of the folks who led our students in their engagement and participation in the doc. The next student we have, Catherine Lee, is a senior at Douglas College, double majoring in visual art and information technology and informatics, and she's an avid participant. She has been an avid participant in the Rutgers doc. Next, we have Megan McCarran Haber, who is a junior at Douglas College, majoring in women's and gender studies and minoring in international and global studies. And finally, we have Elaine Zundel, who is Dean of the Douglas Project for Rutgers Women in Math, Science, and Engineering. She develops programs to recruit and retain women and minorities in STEM fields where they remain underrepresented. Her main interest is in integrating gender into research content and methods as a way to improve outcomes and lead to greater diversity in STEM. So we know these folks will have some really interesting and provocative things to say about their participation in docs. So thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. And I'd like to remind you all that we will be live tweeting this throughout the afternoon using the hashtag #TeachDigitalFem. So please join in if you'd like to. So as instructors who participated in the first semester of the FemTechNet doc experiment, we are going to talk a little bit about our experience and that of our students and share some student projects from the class. Our institutional situation is an unusual one, and we'll elaborate on that. And the student projects that you'll see today will reflect the diversity of our students' academic backgrounds and interests. So I think my colleague Elaine will say a little bit about herself now.
So Karen and I work at Douglas together, but we work in two different areas. And actually my background is in women's and gender studies, even though I run a program for women in science. So that has some interesting complexities. But while I was pursuing my master's here at Rutgers, I was heavily influenced by courses that talked about the body as a material condition upon which gender is culturally produced and inscribed. And I came to feminist science studies through a lot of courses on Foucault and biopower and biopolitics. And I wanted to think about, as in the Douglas Project, in my current role, what does it mean if diverse populations are not part of the scientific community? And what kind of discoveries are being made if only by privileged subjects that dominate the scientific fields? And would science look different if practiced by differently gendered, raced, or ethnic peoples?
So my background is in the humanities, and as Brittany mentioned, I work for Signs, Journal of Women in Culture and Society, and so it was interesting to hear, the discussion about publishing that we had in the last session. And one thing, while I was working at Science, I increasingly became aware of interdisciplinarity as a hallmark of women's studies scholarship, and also that feminist research involves a variety of sources, archival materials, films, artworks, music, fieldwork interviews, among many others, as well as scholarly text. And new media resources allow a rich engagement with diverse materials that demand interdisciplinary analysis. I also was really struck by the importance of documentary film in feminist activism and increasingly in scholarship. And also was aware of the way that film was being used in teaching across the disciplines, but also the relatively uncritical approaches that teachers were using as compared with written text. So sort of a lack of the same sort of critical approach to films used in classes other than film studies, as compared with written text. And one of my main interests is in feminist art, and in the 70s, new video technology was very widely used by and adopted by women artists that, as was remarked in connection with the landmark WAC exhibition of feminist art, that it was kind of considered a women's medium. And that was in part because of technological changes that made media technology more accessible and distribution more widely available. And I was very much influenced by Alex Juhas's work, Women of Vision in particular, and was inspired by that to sort of want to reclaim that spirit of technological experimentation and empowerment that drove women in the 70s to produce media. So these ideas kind of all coalesced to lead to the founding of Films for the Feminist Classroom in 2009, which was an online open access publication that reviews documentary films specifically for teachers. And I founded this with Deanna Utrusky while we were both working at Signs with the support of Mary Hawksworth. And when I went to work for Douglas Residential College a couple of years ago, I wasn't able to remain involved with Films for the Feminist Classroom, but I really wanted a way to sort of bring these ideas about media, feminist scholarship, and pedagogy to the students at Douglas. And I will say, I'm happy to say that Films for the Feminist Classroom has moved to Texas Women's University, and Agatha Baines, who did her PhD here and was a member of the editorial collective, has it there. So I'm very happy that it is continuing. So to say a little bit about our very particular institutional context, Elaine and I both work for Douglas Residential College, which was founded in 1918 as the New Jersey College for Women. It was the first institution of higher learning in the state of New Jersey to admit women. So it has a long history of women's education and empowerment. It was gradually absorbed into Rutgers, and today it exists as a co-curricular institution that's open to any undergraduate woman student at Rutgers, New Brunswick, enrolled in any academic major or any school. Douglas serves approximately 2,000 students, and it's a vibrant community that fosters the development of our students, and who we see thrive in the supportive all-women environment. For me, one of the most exciting things about Douglas is the potential that it offers for learning across disciplinary divides, given that all our students come from all majors and all schools. In the spirit of holistic education and feminist struggles against the compartmentalization of experience. Working with Elaine on the FemTechNet doc seemed an enormous and exciting opportunity to combine my interest in feminist art, publishing, literature, and media together with the work that she does at the Douglas Project on science and technology to bring students to an awareness of the intertwining of these fields and their relevance to students' lives, academic interests, and social positionings.
And, to sort of give you background about the Douglas Project, we're a 27-year-old program that supports women in science. We're one of the oldest programs in the country. We were informed by, arguments by Karen McTighe-Musel, who was talking about integrating feminist studies and women's studies into science, and how to integrate practices that, women's studies developed into programming for women in STEM. So, in one way, in one sphere, I'm kind of interested in introducing students to more programming about sex and gender. But I'm also interested in why science should recognize, or scientific departments should recognize why more content about science, about sex and gender would be relevant to them in their disciplines. So again, this is between two worlds. This is between, women's studies and students who might be majoring in biology or physics or chemistry, and talking about why these topics are relevant to them, but also relevant to their departments. I think that our students can lead to a more accurate and less, culturally limited science in the future, which is why the project exists and has the kind of content that it has. And lately, we've been focused more and more on computing and technology, because women are vastly underrepresented in computing. I was at the last Grace Hopper conference, which is one of the biggest gatherings of women in computing in the world, and there was, Maria Clave was there talking about, from Harvey Mudd, talking about how, the future will be made up of people who code and people who are coded. And I was really concerned that students in our program who are at least engaged in these technologies were not engaged in a critical way. So this seemed like an amazing opportunity to both work with Karen, but also to bring some of this content to students in a different way. And so we, unlike some of the other instructors in the doc, we used a learning community format. And Douglas has a long history of living learning communities, and living learning communities are documented to have a tremendous impact on women in science. They're more engaged in their major, they have better outcomes when they live together and explore concepts together. So Karen and I decided to try an online learning community. So to reach some of the students at Douglas who don't live on campus, who are non-traditional students, who are commuters, creating a community online to talk about these issues and give them an experience that they don't normally have access to. And so this was like a completely new endeavor for us, a new thing for Douglas, and we moved the format from residential to online.
So we were both influenced by Anne Balsamo's work, so Elaine, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about.
Well, when you move a learning community that's a living learning community, where people are living together in close proximity in real life, if I could say that, and you try to create a community online. We thought a lot about Anne's critique of the virtual reality, how the material body becomes commodified, and repression and conceptual fragmentation works on their bodies. But we also looked at it as an opportunity to take our students' experiences of the online virtual reality and create for students to create their own narrative about their experiences online, which might be more critical of dominant representations of women online. To take, maybe isolated moments that they've experienced with online gaming or mobile communities or online communities, and make sense of them both for the rest of the community, but also for themselves. So we, maybe we want to talk a little bit about the challenges now?
Yeah, well, I think I would also want to say that one of the reasons that I found Anne's work inspiring was this sort of talk about the ways that new technologies required sort of new pedagogies and changes in institutional structures. In Designing Culture, she says we need to stop thinking about new digital technologies as the channels through which education is delivered, and instead explore the ways in which these technologies are implicated in the reconfiguration of knowledge production across domains of human culture. The aim is then to take these insights as the basis for rethinking structures and pedagogies within formal educational institutions. And this is, we felt like we were engaged in an experiment both as being part of the FemTechNet doc, but also there was a very particular spin on it given our location in Douglas and the fact that we were trying to do this as a living community, primarily not for credit. The students were engaged in that way, except for the two that you see here. It was challenging, I will have to say, for a number of different reasons.
We were using Sakai, which is Rutgers' online platform, but we found that the blogging ability of Sakai was very limited. So we tried Google Plus because it would be more fun. The students could post more videos, more fun stuff, right? But then there were levels of community inclusion, privacy levels. Everyone had to learn to use this new format, which didn't really catch on. So we struggled with that. We struggled to create a community feeling, which we take for granted in our living learning communities. It was really hard to do that online, even though students were, reading the same things and had very similar experiences. They were not, connecting with each other. And so then it was also difficult to get them to connect to the larger community of the FemTechNet Commons and our online community there, where they actually had access to women all over the country and the world who were also talking about similar issues, but we couldn't get them to engage beyond our sort of smaller community. Of course, the ones who were getting credits were more engaged in those who were doing it for the non-credit option. Some of the talks the dialogues were not, were a little bit too advanced for them. They didn't have the preparation to really understand what was happening in the online dialogues.
These are the FemTechNet dialogues that were sort of the core materials for the FemTechNet doc that was shared across all the institutions that were teaching. And
the themes are really engaging, and Karen and I were really engaged. But we, in the future, we could prepare the students differently to be able to understand the dialogues. We have a really great machine in place for recruiting students to live on campus and live in our learning communities, but we don't really have one to recruit students to an online community. I don't know.
Yeah. So in the end, despite our utopian ideals for this feminist community, parasitic on but not constrained by academic hierarchies, structures, and disciplinary boundaries, we were still caught within its snares. And the way that Douglas is positioned within the university made this project more difficult, even as it presented opportunities for this kind of experiment. And this sort of engagement that we knew would be enormously beneficial to our students. And it seemed like in the beginning, Elaine and I were the only ones who were so excited and could see the benefit and the importance of this project for our students. We both work as full-time administrative positions with very heavy workloads, and so with no recognition or additional compensation for being involved with this, it was really, really hard and difficult to sustain, even though the material was very exciting. That lack of support in general kind of mattered. And the difficulties of navigating the institutional structure. But there were many positive things that came out of it. We could call it a productive failure, but I think that's not, this may be putting too negative a spin on it. Certainly was productive.
Well, a lot of the events that were part of the doc, which took place live on campus, were very successful. And actually, Katie McCullough, who helped us a lot with Wikipedia storming on campus, those events were great. Students were really interested in how these online communities worked, who was producing these articles. It corresponded with a lot of things in our Knowledge and Power class, our mission course at Douglas. So we were able to really get the students on campus engaged in the issues of the doc, so students who weren't even in the doc. And really, Karen and I want to do more of those types of community building projects because they were just so successful. And the community that Karen and I found within the FemTechNet community was amazing. We do feel a little isolated being administrators, so getting to work with women from all over the country and the world and talk about syllabi, and that was an experience that we had never really had, and it was amazing and very engaging.
That sense of community, both collaborating with Elaine and working with Katie, and some of the online chats and meetings with the FemTechNet Pedagogy Committee, and there was this amazing presentation. Karen Kiefer Boyd, who was one of the instructors on feminist mapping, she did this amazing project, and I got to meet her at NWSA. So that sort of sense of community and the intellectual stimulation were really rewarding. Really important parts of important aspects of being involved in this for me, and it was really exciting too to think about the possibilities for innovation within academia that weren't profit driven. That was an exciting idea for me as well.
And during syllabi development, where in the community in FemTechNet, people were exchanging readings with each other. There were, what do you use to teach this? Who should we bring in to do a dialogue? So it was kind of a moment where anything was possible. And there was something I really wanted to say about the Wikipedia storming. Even there were resources posted online so that if you'd never done it before, as an instructor, you could go in, chat with someone who had done it before, get, handouts and worksheets, brainstorm about the best way to do it. So you felt like you weren't, alone, teaching alone. So it really was, that in that sense, very collaborative.
Yeah, and another thing I'll say about the wiki storming activities that we do is that it drew in students who were not actually part of the learning community. So some other students participated as well, and they really responded to that exercise, and that's certainly something that we will continue and expand. So that was a real success. Yeah, so we do hope as we continue, we hope to be able to continue participating in the doc in some way, and want to get students to see the big picture, to connect what they learn in their majors with what they do in their everyday lives, the ways they engage with technology in their everyday lives. Is there anything else, Elaine, that you would like to say?
No, I
Before we move on to the students? Okay. All right, so now we're going to show a couple of student projects that came out of this class. And I think that Catherine and Megan are, it's really interesting because they have very different backgrounds and very different interests, and these are reflected in their projects, which are just, are really diverge quite a bit. Megan has long considered herself to be a loud and proud feminist, and she's a women's and gender studies major, and with a minor in international and global studies. Catherine, who's a double major in fine art and information technology and informatics, had only had a brief introduction to feminism through the Knowledge and Power Issues in Women's Leadership, which is the course taken by Douglas students in their first semester. We're going to ask Catherine to show a film that she created, and I'll give a little explanation here of it. Catherine was part of a delegation of Douglas students who attended the Youth Assembly at the United Nations about a year ago, and then she returned to the Youth Assembly this past summer, and she's since become active in student organizations here at Rutgers that are centered on the UN, but she also was inspired by the talks that she heard at the Youth Assembly and people she met there to make use of her background in IT to get involved in various projects such as Microsoft's Taking It Global and Innovate for Good. And in fact, Catherine just received the news today that, can you explain exactly what it is that you...
Well, it was actually through one of the other programs at Taking It Global that I was involved with that originally was piloted in June that I was a part of. And we had like a little feedback session this morning at 10. And the co-founder of Taking It Global was there, and she had offered me at the end, right before I left for class, a position to facilitate at least one of their cycles of that program. So right now, it's still, I have the offer, but we have said that we would work it out via email because they are based in Toronto and I'm obviously here. So we
For a
said,
little while longer.
So we said that we would work it out via email, how I would facilitate it and how long, if it's more than one cycle, if it's just one cycle.
Great.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so the video that Catherine has produced here uses a variety of sources to tell the story of the ways that young people, and especially young women, are using social media to further the achievement of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals.
Is the sound going?
Yeah. Can you raise the sound?
Is the sound going?
Yes. It is, it's low.
Can you raise it?
Is the sound in here?
Belong to the largest generation of youth the world has known. The challenges are many for jobs, for opportunity, for social justice and environmental sustainability.
Sustainable development is a defining issue for all of us, and young people can and must play a central role in bringing new ideas, fresh thinking, and energy in that area.
There has never been a generation better positioned in spreading its messages than your own. You are the so-called digital natives. Your voice can reach millions in a second.
And it's just incredible the power of our own imagination when we're young, when we're really young and in our youth, and how sad it is to think that that imagination, that sense of hope, that sense of peace, that sense of optimism fades as we grow older. Why are they perceived as sort of delinquents, as problems to be managed, to be solved, to discipline? Why are people less imaginative when they're older? Why are we conditioned to not be as creative, yet to solve the problems that exist in the world today? The most important ingredient that we need is imagination. I was growing up as part of a generation that had access to information and knowledge, not just to influence me, but that I could influence. That I could influence. My voice matters, but it's not about me. It's actually about whether or not people realize the power that they have.
Technology and networks has expanded the scope of possibility for young generations, starting with our generation and the next generations to come. And with Taking It Global, over 80% of the people who responded to our impact survey said that their perception about the ability of young people to affect change in the world actually changed as a result of being part of our network. We can leverage technology and networks in so many ways. And we think about the massive issue of youth unemployment.
How could projects linked to gender beneficiate from this kind of initiative?
Well, I'm proud to say that 50% of our e-course participants are women, and we very much believe in the power of gender parity and the power of inclusion. And also, as we think about the world's population of women, and young people need to be part of decision-making, young women need to be part of those opportunities. We do have lower numbers in Africa, and we really focus on the role of mentorship.
Former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, memorably declared that educating and empowering girls is the key to world peace and the most effective tool for global development. The World Bank released a report demonstrating that investing in women raises economic productivity several-fold, empowering entire communities and countries. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just this month insisted that the world cannot progress if women and girls are denied their rights and left behind. Yet, 7 years after Annan's initial statement, millions of girls around the globe are not realizing their intrinsic power. Instead of saving the world, they are eroding their potential, falling victim to over 80% of human trafficking cases, over 70% of illiteracy cases, and over 75% of HIV/AIDS cases in African youth. But the point is that all across the globe, girls are losing self-dominion to a culture that decrees their duty is to cater to others and to mold themselves into castes set by society. All around the world, girls are accepting this culture and blinding themselves to their potential. But this does not have to be the case. We can defy this culture, for there is a special power that is created when girls who have been blinded to their potential learn to open their eyes and discover in their own souls the living, breathing, pulsing dreams of another. This discovery, I argue, is the key to. Instead, we must recognize that girls are a community of change makers. The world is their collective narrative, and it is only by understanding and leveraging their interrelationships that they can fully appreciate their unique roles within the circle of humanity. It is only by opening their eyes to their connections to one another that they can fully embrace their individual potential.
You're sharing this space, this online space, with people from all around the world who have these ideas and want to make some change in the world.
Being able to connect with a global community, with people from India to Africa, gave me motivation and encouragement to continue trying to create positive change in my community.
Our fellows are having real-world impact. Their projects are reaching thousands of people in their local communities, and globally they're looked to as examples of hope and possibility for the future.
You know, you may want to be the next Shepard Fairey or the next J.K. Rowling, or the next whoever, it doesn't matter, but whatever you want, chase after it with everything that you have, not because of the fame or the fortune, but solely because that's what you believe in, because that's what makes your heart sing. That's what your dance is. That's what is going to define our generation. When we start chasing and fighting after the things that we love and that we want to fight for. I cared too much in high school about what people thought about me. That's what's so awesome about this conference is so many of you are so young. Find that thing that inspires you, that you love, and just chase after it. Fight for that, because that is what is going to change this world, and that is what defines us.
Antoine de Saint-Exupéry once wrote, "What is essential is invisible to the eye. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly." Though you cannot see this energy, this magic, it is there. And it is the reason we choose to gather in groups and gatherings such as these. It is where we transmit the energy we feel on topics such as global development and create new ways of thinking simply by meeting and by experiencing each other. That is magic. When you who are abroad watching this presentation are changed thousands of miles away, changed by what you heard in this great hall, magic. Yes, when I was a kid, I played at tricks. But you all together before me, at home and around the world, watching us, are sharing a movement for change across generations. All those energies, synergies, possibilities can and will change the world for the better in our future. To you, the change makers, all I say is continue to let the magic stream between you. You have graduated now from our version of Hogwarts. Now go and make magic together. Make your world a better place for all.
What are you doing at this moment to make sure you are living your life to its fullest potential, to its most fun? How are you harnessing your inner kid? Like I said, life is full of chances and risks, and we can't predict anything. Yet it is the wisest of us all who will forge ahead anyway to leave a heartfelt legacy on this planet, regardless of whether we have a day or a century ahead of us.
But if there's one thing that I want to drive home to you, one thing that I can say, not just to you, but to myself, is that is the acts that make us extraordinary, not the over moments.
Moving forward, if there's an idea or something that you generally care about in your community, go out and do it. Don't wait for permission or for someone else to take the initiative. It may take much hardships and a lot of work, but what is important is to never give up. Human potential is infinite. For goals such as the eradication of poverty and sustainable development, there are no national boundaries, but a single planetary one. We are all in this together. The development goals are collective promises to ensure that this world and everyone in it can thrive. I know for sure that in this generation, we will see an end to poverty, we will accomplish all the 8 ideals of the Millennium Development Goals, and we will be able to make sure that all people can not only live, but live a life with dignity, and we can do so together.
Let us empower our own movement.
No, I have a recording in presentation. Yep. So, as Karen said, I'm a lifelong feminist, and we had a project to do that was thinking about the ways that I was trying to think about the ways that I participate in really gendered institutions throughout my life. And so I was a feminist from birth. That shirt says it's a woman, a baby woman. And so my mom, when she was raising my sister and I, was really aware of the ways that kids learn gender roles. And she had a lot of siblings, and she pushed against that in a very unofficial way as a child. But so she was very adamant that her daughters were not going to play with baby dolls, and they weren't going to like have kitchen sets or tea parties unless, I mean, if they wanted it. And of course, as soon as we started school, we met all the other little girls and we wanted it. And it was a little disappointing to her because she had tried to shelter us from this restrictive idea of femininity, even as a 2-year-old. So of course, the way my sister and I really actively engaged with it was through the Disney princesses. And so I was obsessed with Belle from Beauty and the Beast, mostly because she was the smart one and she liked to read. And as a child and an adult, I really identify with that, and was never really cognizant of the problems within the rest of the structure of it. So when I was 8, I dressed up. That's not a picture of me, obviously. But when I was 8, I dressed up in the costume. And so I was thinking about all these things when I was embarking on this project. So Disney Princesses as a line of merchandise was introduced in the year 2000 by Disney because of their floundering consumer products division. And so what they did was they took all of these female characters out of their stories and put them into a homogenized marketable group called the Disney Princesses. And as you can see, if you go into a toy store ever, it has had humongous effects. They went from $0 in revenue in less than 10 years to over $4 billion coming into Disney through their princess line. And in doing this, any sort of individuality that the characters themselves might have, so the fact that Belle's the smart one and likes to read, become completely irrelevant and unnecessary. It's really just marketing the image. So Belle's depiction across the princess line, she's in her ball gown, she's got a rose in her hair, and her makeup's all done. There's not any book anywhere. And then, there are a couple of really starch examples with the princesses in the line that depart from what you would think of the restrictive, like Snow White, Cinderella princess. So one example is Mulan, who, if you're familiar with the story at all, she poses as a man to go fight in war in place of her father. But of course, in the Disney princess line, she is packaged in the traditional dress that she shirked to do all of that in the beginning of the movie. A more recent example is Merida from the movie Brave, which is a Pixar production, but Disney owns Pixar, and actually most of the people who worked on this production were originally from Disney. And so Merida is a princess in Scotland, and she doesn't really want to be. She doesn't want to get married to the princes that her father has picked out. She's also a really incredibly skilled archer, and so she has her bow and arrow that she takes with her everywhere. Of course, when they announced last year that she was going to become part of the princess line, she becomes the image on the left, or the right, sorry, where they have, I don't know how you make a Scottish girl's skin whiter, but she's been lightened, her hair is tamed, her waist is shrunk, her bust is increased, and most egregiously, she loses her weapon and her power and gets a sparkly sash in its place. And Disney said that they did this because they wanted to, like, a cohesive look across the line, but I think it's very obvious the insidious nature of these alterations. So to back up a little bit, I did a lot of research in the way gender roles are taught to children and how we appropriate them. So Judith Butler's work, Gender Trouble, articulated classically that gender is a social construct, and what we take for granted as normal is really constantly reinforced by things in our surrounding and people in our surrounding. And so the particular difficulty of the expansive nature of princess culture now is that young girls are being taught that this is how you become a desirable adult woman. You want to be a princess. Peggy Ornstein wrote a book, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, and she's a journalist. So she was taking it from the perspective of watching her young daughter grow up in this incredibly hyper-feminized, hyper-sexualized in a way culture. And she first wrote an article where she said, what's the big deal? It's just a phase. And what I saw in my research that made it much more dangerous than just a phase is that this princessification of girlhood is being extended through the rest of women's lives. So I found this summer that Disney now actually makes and markets quinceañera dresses. And for people, I don't know if everybody knows that the quince is like a rite of passage for a young girl into womanhood. And these are licensed, marketed, and made by Disney to have a dress that looks like your favorite Disney princess in human form. So those are the three that they have for Belle. The other interesting connection I saw was between princess culture and wedding culture, because I am guilty of watching all of those awful reality shows that exist on the notion of being a princess for a day and having your fairy tale wedding, and asking myself, why is it that as women, our desires aren't supposed to have changed from when we were 5 years old playing dress up? Why do we, and why are we being treated like this consumer? Because it's what it's doing. It's creating lifelong consumers of a very particular kind of femininity. So in being involved with the FemTechNet, I watched the dialogues, and there was a really interesting point made on October 6th in the dialogue on gender, or technologies of gender, and gender as technology. So I'm going to read from my paper. Maria Fernandez explained that the idea of gender and race as technologies, in that they are a series of techniques that have been historically used to establish differences, hierarchical differences among people. Lisa Nakamura elaborated on this point when she expanded the definition of technology beyond the modern association with computing as technology. Race, gender, and technology have been central to the development of feminism, especially when technology is considered as a tool that gets things done. In princess culture, the technology of gender creates subservient, vain, codependent women, or at the very least begins to indoctrinate young girls into a cult of femininity that values such things over the masculine attributes such as cunning, independent wealth, and bravery. In the same dialogue session, technologies are created for someone and thus by default are not created for someone else. So princess culture functioning in this form of technology of gender takes that idea and amplifies it through an all-encompassing nature. It attracts young girls who may, without constant external stimuli, be attracted to the idea of vanity and beauty. But in its all-consuming nature, it is also able to subdue other desires, such as for cunning, independence, and bravery, in girls who may be so inclined. It harnesses the desires of the few and sells it to the masses as a normative child's gender development. Even more so, it has managed to become labeled as harmless childhood fun among girls, completely eliminating the idea and desires for those whom the technology was not created. So the biggest question that I got out of this project was the idea of having a choice, because Disney and all the other participants therein always market these like, oh, we do research and this is what women want, this is what girls want, and we want them to have the choice. You don't have to consume our product if you don't want to. And my question is, how much of a choice do you really have when all of your choices are the same? I mean, I was born in 1992, and princess culture really has hit a new high since the year 2000 when Disney consolidated it all. And even if my mother had the difficulty of pushing back against those influences of my peers, what are the young girls growing up now experiencing? People will argue against it, saying that we don't have like mindless drones of princesses. We don't see them, but I don't know how you can argue with like having wedding dresses modeled after Disney princesses for presumably grown women who want to look like what they wanted to look like when they were 5 years old. And the idea that when you use gender to create this as a tool to create this kind of person, it manages to reinforce the status quo. And those were the things I was exploring. I ran out of time.
All right, well, I guess that's it from us. But yeah, I wanted to say just very briefly that I'm really excited to be here for today and tomorrow, and to have all the visitors here and some people who have returned and colleagues at Rutgers, and it's a pleasure to be taking part in this event. So thanks to Mary and Brittany for organizing it and including us. Thank you all.
We'll take 5 minutes for some questions from the audience because we're in our break time, so we have a little wiggle room. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you all for wonderful presentations, and I appreciate the candor with which you were trying to deal with the challenges of doing something totally innovative in an institution that's anti-innovation. But I wish you would talk just a little bit about the whiteness of the outcomes. I mean, it was race, gender, technoculture. So were there more students of color at the beginning? Was that part of the recruitment challenge? Can you just tell us a little bit about what happened with respect to, the goal of a more inclusive project?
To recruit for the project, we emailed, students that were in other programs at Douglas that were interested in technology. There were other students at the beginning that were more involved, but I think students who are interested in issues of technology or in computer science majors or IT majors have very demanding course loads. So trying to find a way to fit in something extra, because our course really is extra. It doesn't fulfill a core requirement for them. I think, complicated things. Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, well, I guess I just would say to more directly respond to your question, the group wasn't as diverse as we had hoped, or so from the start.
I think it was because when you say technology or computing in your advertising, you tend to get students who are already interested in those, and those students are most often white and male. So.
I have a question about Whiteness and the Disney princess, and I really enjoy your presentation, by the way. That was wonderful. So I just went, my husband is from Michigan, and over Christmas I went back and I visited his family and his friends, and I met again two little girls. One is 4, one is 5. Both of them are completely in love with Disney princesses. And also, both of them, one is blonde, one is red-haired, one is dark-haired, both white. Both of them are completely in love with Princess Aurora, who is the epitome of whiteness, right? And so you have all these diverse Disney princesses, but nonetheless, little girls still aren't really choosing these as models. And I really enjoy your presentation about how gender functions as a technology that governs us from childhood to adulthood. But for moms and dads that are trying to deal with this, what would you suggest? How do you get, you went through this yourself. On the perspective of race, how do you get your kids to actually consider maybe a non-white princess as something desirable?
It's a little bit of a complicated question because it's the idea that on the one hand, I wish that they didn't need the extra push, that this is also desirable. And in my own case, it wasn't ever really in opposition. It was I remember I had asked for, I think, an American Girl doll, and my mom got me like a globe, I don't know what the name of it was, but as a 5-year-old, I saw no problem with the fact that there was, that my mother had given a very white-looking young child of myself a diverse array of toys to play with, both in type and in race and gender and non-gender. But point being that I think it's a lot of work for parents to have to do to fight against the whiteness of the culture. And Disney liked to use essentially, like they gave us Tiana, and now there is a black princess, but they don't really do much to promote her as being part of the princess line. I believe she only technically became a princess at the end of the movie, even like when she found out, and she spends the whole movie as a frog. Like it's just a very complicated issue. And then they also do the really insidious thing of whitening all of their princesses, even the white ones. I mean, I made the joke about Merida, but if you compare Tiana and Pocahontas and Mulan in the princess line to their movie counterparts, they are lightened in every way. And I think it's a really hard question that I, as a young person, haven't had to deal with from the other side. And I think it has more to do with the social structures that keep cisgendered, heteronormative whiteness as the ideal. Oh boy.
All right, this is going to be our last question. Yeah, we're nearly out of time.
Okay. Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation on the princesses. One thing I wanted to say is that a lot of the arguments to be made about Disney have parallel those that have been made about Barbie. And there's a vast literature out there about Barbie and the whiteness of Barbie, and then how Mattel went about marketing alternative Barbies to reach a different kind of market, but how they whited them out, right? Whitewashed all the ethnic Barbies and so on, and it was more a matter of clothing rather than a matter of phenotype and so on. The interesting thing, though, is that the consumption of the images and how they do translate in real life and in real embodied experience of little girls or adults is complicated. And of course, there's a different kind of research project to be made there. Is about talking to the consumers or looking at what the consumers actually do once they get the dresses. Because at the same time we have these kinds of dresses, there is another culture of dresses out there, like, for example, Vera Wang, right?
Yeah.
Black wedding dresses, right? This is different, other kind of femininity, a different kind of representation of how to be an ideal woman, hipster, whatever. On Facebook, I just got a picture of little girls in tutus, but with superhero tops, right? And so there is always room for subversion and not total consumption of the images that's put out there or the discourses of femininity that are put out there. So, but it's still, you're right on point about the production. Now, the consumption aspect is another project that needs to be examined further. Thank you.
I did want to quickly say that in my original project, I actually did deal with the Vera Wang, and that's why we started to laugh, because my last slide was a picture of this wedding dress, which is by Vera Wang from spring 2013. And I did not have the time to argue today, but the point that it's not that these things are inherently bad, but it's the ways that we're being treated as consumers as opposed to how we're functioning as consumers. So I have this dress and I love it and I think it's beautiful and it's art to me. It doesn't mean that I see that dress and I want to wear it because I want to be a princess for a day.
All right, let's give our panel a round of applause.